You ever feel the exact moment your heart turns to lead? Not breaks. Breaking is too loud. Lead is heavy. Just sinks. I'm standing in our kitchen. Well, the kitchen of the apartment I paid for by working 3 shifts at the diner until my ankles swelled to the size of grapefruit. There's a duffel bag on the table. It's his bag. The one I bought him when he won his first amateur fight. I'm done, Elena, Jack says. He doesn't even look at me. He's looking at his reflection in the darkened window, adjusting the collar of a leather jacket that costs more than our rent. I'm moving into the training camp in Vegas. Permanent. I felt the air leave the room. Vegas. Jax, we talked about this. Once you turned pro, we were going to find a little place outside the city. A place where I didn't have to smell exhaust every time I opened a window. He finally looks at me. But it's not the Jax who used to hold my face like I was made of glass. His eyes are hard. Professional. Cold. There is no we in a championship, Elle. I'm a rising star. Look at you. You're covered in grease and cheap perfume. You look like struggle. And I'm done struggling. I struggled for you, I whispered. My voice didn't even sound like mine. Sounded like a ghost. I worked the double shifts so you could train. I bought your protein. I paid your medical bills when your ribs were cracked. I stayed when you had nothing. And that's the problem, he says, zipping the bag. The sound is like a blade. Every time I look at you, I remember being poor. I remember the hunger. I need winners around me now. Not reminders of the gutter. He walked out. He didn't look back. He left a stack of $200 on the counter. Like I was a tip. Like 3 years of my life was worth a couple of bills and a cold shoulder. I stood there, the silence of the apartment ringing in my ears, and I realized something. He didn't just dump a poor girl. He dumped the only person who actually knew his soul. But Jax didn't know mine. He never even asked why I never talked about my father. He never asked why I had a trust fund I refused to touch because I wanted to build a life from the dirt up. He wanted a winner. Short, bitter laugh. Oh, he has no idea what he just lost. I picked up the $200 and tore them into confetti. I didn't need his money. I needed my phone. It was time to call the one person I'd avoided for 5 years. The man who owned half the skyline Jax was so desperate to be a part of. I didn't cry. That's the thing about hitting rock bottom. You realize the ground is solid enough to stand on. I watched his car taillights fade into the rainy street from our 3rd-floor walk-up. Jax Thorne. The thunder from the east. He was heading to the bright lights, leaving me in the shadows he thought I belonged in. I walked to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. He was right about one thing. I looked like the struggle. My hair was pulled back in a messy knot, my apron was stained with coffee and industrial cleaner, and there were dark circles under my eyes that no amount of sleep could fix. I had dimmed my own light to make sure he could shine. I had played the role of the poor, supportive girlfriend, so well that I had almost forgotten who I actually was. I reached into the back of my closet, under a loose floorboard where I kept the things I didn't want the world, or Jax, to see. I pulled out a small black leather box. Inside wasn't jewelry. It was a single gold signet ring and a black titanium card with no numbers on the front. My fingers trembled. Using this meant going back. It meant admitting that my experiment with a normal, humble life had ended in a bloody mess. My father, Silas Sterling, had told me 5 years ago, "Elena, the world doesn't love the weak. They prey on them. You'll come back when you realize that love is just a transaction you can't afford." I hated him for being right. But standing in this empty, cold apartment, I realized I couldn't be the victim anymore. If Jax wanted to play in the big leagues, he was going to find out that I owned the stadium. Picked up the phone. Rang twice. "Sterling residence," a formal voice answered. "It's Elena," I said. My voice was steady now. "Cold. Tell my father the prodigal daughter is bored of the dirt. Send a car to the corner of 5th and Main. And Marcus, make sure it's the armored one. I want to make an entrance." As I waited on the curb in the rain, a sleek black limousine pulled up, splashing the very spot where Jax had stood minutes before. The door opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped out. But it wasn't a driver. It was Julian Vane, the billionaire tech mogul who had been trying to marry into my family since we were kids. He looked at my stained apron, then at my face and smiled. He really was a fool, wasn't he? Julian didn't ask questions. That was the beauty of people in our world. They understood that sometimes you just needed to burn a bridge to stay warm. "You look like a disaster, Elle," Julian said, offering me a silk handkerchief as I sat in the back of the car. The scent of expensive leather and aged scotch filled my lungs, replacing the smell of fried onions and despair. "I look like a lesson learned, Julian," I replied, wiping a smudge of grease from my cheek. "How much do you know about Jax Thorne?" Julian chuckled, a sound like gravel over velvet. "The boxer. He's talented. Yes, arrogant. He just signed a promotional deal with Vanguard Sports." "Why? You want me to buy his contract and bury him?" "No," I said, looking out the tinted window as we passed the diner where I'd worked 6 hours ago. "I want him to succeed. I want him to reach the absolute top. I want him to see everything he ever dreamed of within his grasp." Julian leaned forward, his eyes glinting. And then I want to be the one who decides if he gets to keep it." The transition was jarring. Within 3 days, the diner girl was dead. I moved into a penthouse that looked down on the very gym where Jax used to train. I traded my polyester uniform for bespoke silk and Italian wool. But the hardest change wasn't the clothes, it was the heart. I had to kill the part of me that still wondered if Jax was eating enough, if he was icing his knuckles, if he was lonely. I started showing up. Not as Elena the waitress, but as Elena Sterling, the silent partner in my father's acquisitions firm. My first mission: a massive sponsorship deal for the upcoming Global Heavyweight Showcase. The face of the campaign: Jax Thorne. The first time he saw me again was at the gala at the Pierre Hotel. He was wearing a tuxedo, his arm wrapped around some blonde influencer who looked like she was made of plastic and ego. He was laughing, holding a glass of champagne like he'd been born for it. I walked into the ballroom with Julian on my arm. The room went silent, not because of Julian, but because of the woman in the midnight blue gown that looked like it was woven from the night sky. Jax's glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes went wide. He didn't recognize me at first, not until I walked straight up to him, the heels of my shoes clicking like a countdown on the marble floor. "Hello, Jax," I said. My voice was smooth, cultured, and utterly lethal. "I heard you were looking for a benefactor. It's funny how the world works, isn't it?" Jax stumbled over his words, his face turning a shade of pale I'd never seen in the ring. "Elena, what is this? What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, Julian stepped in, placing a protective hand on the small of my back. "That's as Sterling to you, Thorne. And she's the one who just decided whether your career lives or dies tonight." The air in the ballroom was so thin I thought I'd choke. Jax was staring at me like I'd risen from the dead, and the plastic-looking girl on his arm was glaring at me like I was the enemy. Which I was. Just not the one she thought I was. "Elena Sterling," Jax whispered, the words getting caught in his throat. "That's impossible. You were." "I was convenient," I said, finishing his thought. "You thought I was part of your struggle, Jax. But the struggle was yours. I was just the backdrop." I looked at Julian and smiled, a cold, practiced gesture. "Mr. Thorne here seems to think that a family name defines your value. Ironic, considering he doesn't even have one." His face went from pale to a deep, ugly crimson. Jax never was good at taking a hit outside the ring. "You lied to me," he snarled, taking a step forward. Julian didn't move an inch, just raised an eyebrow. "For 3 years you pretended to be nothing." "I never pretended to be nothing," I corrected him, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried across the silent room. "I was a waitress who loved a man. That man just happened to be a coward. He was afraid of my world, so I created one where he could feel strong. And when he got strong enough, He used that strength to kick me to the curb. I leaned in closer, until I could smell the expensive cologne that had replaced the familiar scent of his sweat. You wanted to be a winner, Jax. You wanted the elite. Well, you got what you wanted. But you missed the finest prize of all. Julian led me away, his hand still warm against my back. But as we walked, I didn't feel victorious. Felt heavy. Like the gold signet ring I was now wearing was made of lead. I hadn't come here for this. I hadn't come here to cause pain. Came for justice. But the line between the two was starting to blur. You did well, Julian murmured as we stepped into the waiting elevator. The doors sealed us into silence. Did I? I looked at my reflection in the polished metal. I didn't see Elena Sterling. I didn't see the waitress. I saw a ghost. Of course, Julian said. He took my hand, his thumb tracing the Sterling signet. You just need to decide, Elle. Are you the queen who will rule this empire? Or are you just the girl who's going to watch it all burn? I pulled my hand away. I wasn't the queen. And I wasn't going to just watch it burn. I was the one holding the match. And I knew exactly where to drop it. I didn't sleep that night. I spent it in the penthouse, watching the sunrise over the city, the cold glow of my laptop screen the only light in the room. I wasn't plotting a hostile takeover. I was plotting a rescue mission. For my own soul. I needed to finalize the details of the global heavyweight showcase. Vanguard Sports, Jax's promotion company, was bleeding money. They needed this sponsorship to survive. And they needed me. I called Marcus, my father's head of security, at 6 a.m. Marcus, I need you to find out everything you can about Jax's contract with Vanguard. The small print, the buyout clauses, everything. And Marcus, be quiet about it. I knew what my father would say. Elena, you are letting emotion dictate business. He was right. That's exactly what I was doing. But this wasn't revenge. It was a trade. My life for his. Later that week, I stood in the glass-walled boardroom of Sterling Acquisitions. Jax's managers were there, sweating in their suits, looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. Jax was there too. He sat in the corner, staring at the floor, the knuckles of his hands white as they gripped the arms of his chair. He looked like a man about to be sentenced. The deal is simple, I stated, dropping a thick folder onto the mahogany table. Vanguard gets the full sponsorship. I take over the majority shareholding of the company. And I control all decision-making regarding the showcase. In return, I want one thing. Anything, Miss Sterling, the senior manager gasped. His eyes shining with the promise of millions. What is it? I looked directly at Jax. His head slowly rose. His eyes were no longer cold. They were exhausted. Me. I want the termination of your contract, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a crack of thunder. I want you out, Jax. Today. No fight. No title. No glory. You want the top. You can find a new ladder. Because this one belongs to me. The room was dead silent. Jax looked from the managers to me. He was trapped. If he refused, Vanguard would collapse, and he'd have nothing anyway. If he signed, he was walking away from the only thing he had left. His dream. He took the pen. The hand that could knock a man unconscious trembled as he brought it to the paper. But before he could sign, the door opened, and my father walked in. His presence commanding the room like an army. Stop, Silas Sterling said. You will not sign that contract, Thorne. Not while I'm alive. My father didn't just walk into a room. He annexed it. His eyes were cold blue diamonds, and they were fixed on me. Leave us, he commanded the room, not raising his voice, not having to. The managers scrambled like cockroaches in a flashlight's beam. Julian, who had been sitting quietly in a corner, gave me a concerned look before stepping out. Only Jax remained, still holding the pen. His knuckles a shade of white that shouldn't be natural. He looked at Silas, then at me, then at the pen. He was the smallest person in the room, and he knew it. Silas, I said, my voice tight. This is my acquisition. My deal. You are my daughter, he returned, taking the seat at the head of the table that I had occupied. And this is Sterling property. You are using my company to fight a schoolyard battle. This man is a nothing. Diversion. You have spent 5 years pretending to be poor, and you are acting like it. I felt the blood drain from my face. My father hadn't just insulted Jax. He had insulted me, my life, my choices. He was tearing down the person I had fought to become. I am not diverting, I said, my voice low and dangerous, a carbon copy of his. I am eliminating a liability. Jax Thorne is a distraction. Once he is gone, I will focus on the acquisition. A liability. Silas laughed, a dry, dusty sound. A liability is a factory that burns down. This man is a distraction. And you, Elena, are a romantic. He looked at Jax. Sign the paper, Mr. Thorne. My daughter wants you out of her sight, and quite frankly, you aren't worth the bandwidth to argue. Jax didn't move. He dropped the pen. It clattered against the wood. No, Jax said. He looked up, and for the first time since that night in the kitchen, I saw the fire in his eyes. It was faint, but it was there. I won't sign. I don't care about the company. I don't care about the sponsorship. I am a fighter, and I am going to fight in this showcase. He stood up, towering over my father, even as my father dismissed him with a glance. I'm not a winner because of my name or your money, Silas, Jax said, his voice raw. I'm a winner because I've been hit harder than any other man, and I'm still standing. I will fight. And when I win, Elena, I am coming for you. My heart did a slow, dangerous roll in my chest. He wasn't talking about love. He was talking about war. And the lion had just chosen his battlefield. The silence Jax left behind in that boardroom was louder than any roar of a crowd. My father just sat there, tapping his signet ring against the mahogany, looking at me like I was a faulty piece of software he needed to debug. You let him walk out with his dignity, Elena, Silas said, his voice clipped. In this world, dignity is the only thing you never leave an opponent. It's the seed of a comeback. I didn't answer. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city. Somewhere down there, in the maze of concrete and ambition, Jax was walking away from a fortune because of pride. The same pride I used to find noble when we were sharing a single bowl of ramen in a cold kitchen. Now it just felt like a threat. He won't win the showcase, father, I said, not turning around. He doesn't have the training camp. He doesn't have the backing. I pulled the Vanguard funding. He's a free agent with no gym and a reputation for being difficult. Then why are your hands shaking? Silas asked. I gripped my elbows. He was right. I wasn't shaking from fear. I was shaking because for the first time in weeks, I saw the Jax I had fallen in love with, the one who would rather bleed out than bow down. I spent the next 3 days trying to bury myself in spreadsheets, but Julian wouldn't let me. He showed up at my penthouse with a bottle of wine that cost more than Jax's old car. He's training in a basement in Queens, Julian said, leaning against my kitchen island. The irony of being back in a kitchen, even a designer one, wasn't lost on me. No fancy equipment. Just a heavy bag and a coach who looks like he survived a war. People love an underdog story. The press is starting to sniff around. Let them sniff, I snapped. The underdog dumped his wife because she looked too poor for his future. If the press finds out the truth, the story changes. Julian set the glass down. Does it? Or does it just make you look like the vengeful heiress playing God with a man's career? Carefully, Elena. You're becoming the villain in a story you started as the victim. I looked at the black titanium card sitting on the counter. The villain. Maybe that was the only way to survive people like Jax and Silas. I picked up the phone and dialed the head of the athletic commission. This is Elena Sterling, I said, my voice turning to ice. I want to discuss the medical clearance for Jax Thorne. I believe he has pre-existing injuries that make him a liability for the showcase. If he wanted to fight, I'd make sure the ring was a cage he couldn't even enter. The gala was one thing, but the weigh-in. That's where the blood starts to simmer. I stood in the VIP gallery, looking down at the stage. The lights were blinding, the bass of the music thumping in my chest like a second heartbeat. Jax walked out and the room shifted. He looked different, leaner, harder. He'd lost the celebrity weight he'd put on during his brief stint with the high life. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose, which is the most dangerous kind of man in a ring. He stepped onto the scale. The official nodded. Wait. Then he looked up, straight at the VIP booth. Straight at me. He didn't sneer. He didn't wave. He just tapped his chest right over his heart and then pointed at the floor. I'm still here. He's gained a following, Julian whispered beside me. The ghost of the gutter. That's what they're calling him. The man who walked away from the Sterling millions to fight on his own terms. It's a PR nightmare for your father, El. It's not a nightmare if he loses, I muttered. But as I watched Jax descend the stairs, a woman approached him. It was the same influencer he'd been with at the gala. She tried to put her arm around him for a photo, and Jax, without even looking at her, brushed her off. He walked right past the cameras, right past the fame, and headed for the locker room. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I didn't leave you because you were poor, El. I left because I was becoming someone I hated, and I didn't want you to see me fail. I thought if I cut you loose, you'd be safe from the crash. I didn't know you were the one flying the plane. My breath hitched. A lie. A manipulation. Or the truth he was too proud to tell in that kitchen. I turned to leave, but Marcus, my father's man, blocked my path. Your father wants to see you, Ms. Sterling. It's about the medical documents you submitted. I followed Marcus to a private room behind the stage. Silas was standing there, holding the files I'd sent to the commission. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. You tried to cheat, Elena, he said, tossing the files into a trash can. Sterlings don't cheat to win. We own the person who decides who wins. And since you couldn't break him, I've decided to ensure he wins the title. And then I'm going to sue him for every cent he earns for the next 20 years. He'll be a champion, and he'll be my slave. You ever realize you're fighting the wrong war? I looked at my father, this man who saw people as ledger entries, and then I thought about Jax. Jax, who had been a jerk, yes. Who had been arrogant and blind. But he was a man. My father was a machine. You can't do that, I said, my voice trembling. That contract is predatory. It'll hold up in court for maybe a month. In my courts, it holds up forever, Silas replied, smoothing his tie. You wanted him punished, Elena. I'm just giving you what you asked for. He'll have the glory, but I'll have the gold. Isn't that the justice you wanted? I walked out of that room feeling sick. The silk of my dress felt like sandpaper against my skin. I had moved from the diner to the penthouse, but I had traded my soul for a better view. I found myself walking toward the fighter's entrance. The guards tried to stop me, but one look at my face, and the Sterling badge on my wrist, and they stepped aside. I pushed open the door to Jax's locker room. It wasn't the luxury suite Vanguard had promised him. It was a cramped, damp room with a single bench and the smell of wintergreen and old leather. Jax was sitting there, his hands already wrapped, staring at a small, crumpled photo. It was a photo of us, from the diner, on the day we decided to move in together. We were covered in flour from a kitchen accident, laughing like idiots. You should leave, Jax said, not looking up. The poor girl shouldn't be in a place like this. Might ruin your shoes. Jax, listen to me, I said, stepping closer. My father. He's not just sponsoring the fight. He's bought your debt. He's rigged the legal outcome. If you win tonight, you belong to him. Forever. Jax finally looked up. His eyes were bruised, tired, but incredibly clear. I already belonged to someone who didn't want me, El. What's the difference? The difference is I loved you. I shouted. Jax stood up, stepping into my personal space. The air between us was electric, charged with 3 years of history and 3 months of hate. He reached out, his wrapped hand hovering near my cheek but not touching it. Then tell me, Elena Sterling, he whispered. If I throw this fight, I'm a loser with nothing. If I win, I'm a slave to your father. What's the third option? I looked into his eyes and saw the girl from the diner looking back at me. The third option, I said, is that we burn the whole house down tonight. The third option, I told him, is that we stop playing their game entirely. Jax looked at me, his chest heaving under his training robe. He wasn't the arrogant thunder from the east anymore. He was just Jax, the guy who used to help me carry the heavy flour sacks at the diner when my back hurt. The guy who I thought had traded his soul for a leather jacket and a Vegas zip code. You have 10 minutes until walkout, I said, checking the diamond-encrusted watch on my wrist, a gift from my father that felt like a handcuff. My father has the judges in his pocket. He has the commission. He even has your debt. But he doesn't have the broadcast. Jax narrowed his eyes. The broadcast? Oh, that's a global feed. Millions of people. Exactly, I whispered. I pulled a small flash drive from my clutch. Julian isn't just a billionaire tech mogul, Jax. He's a bored billionaire tech mogul who happens to hate my father's guts as much as I do right now. He's bypassed the stadium's secure server. At the end of the 5th round, during the commercial break, the feed won't cut to a beer ad. It's going to cut to the audio of my father's business meeting from 20 minutes ago. Jax let out a low whistle. The one where he talked about owning me. About rigging the legal outcome. Every word, I said. But you have to get to the 5th round. You have to make it look real. If you go down too early, the narrative dies. If you win too fast, they'll cut the power before the upload finishes. You have to fight like your life depends on it, because after tonight, the Sterling name won't be worth the paper it's printed on. Jax stepped closer. The smell of Tiger Balm and sweat was overwhelming, a visceral reminder of our old life. He reached out and, for the first time in months, actually touched me. His wrapped thumb brushed my jaw. Why are you doing this, El? You're a Sterling. You're throwing away a kingdom for a guy who dumped you in a rainy kitchen. I looked him dead in the eye. I'm not doing it for you, Jax. I'm doing it for the girl in the apron. She deserved better than both of us. The locker room door flew open. Thorne, you're up, the official yelled. Jax squeezed my hand one last time, a silent promise, and turned toward the tunnel. As I watched him walk into the light, my phone vibrated. It was a text from my father. I'm sitting ringside, Elena. Don't disappoint me. I've already drafted the press release for your engagement to Julian. We'll announce it after the knockout. My blood turned to liquid nitrogen. My father wasn't just buying Jax. He was selling me. The stadium was a sea of screaming voices, but all I could hear was the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of gloves hitting flesh. I was sitting in the front row, 3 seats down from my father. He looked regal, smug, sipping a scotch as he watched Jax take a brutal hook to the ribs. Jax was losing, or at least he was making it look that way. His opponent, a mountain of a man named Kovacs, was relentless. By the 3rd round, Jax's left eye was swollen shut. By the 4th, he was spitting blood. He's pathetic, Silas leaned over and whispered to me. See, this is the hero you wasted 3 years on. A gutter dog who can't even guard his own chin. I gripped the velvet arms of my chair so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked across the ring at Julian. He gave me a subtle nod. The upload was at 90%. The bell rang for the 5th round. Jax came out differently. He wasn't retreating anymore. He moved like a dancer, a ghost in the ring. He started landing combinations that made the crowd gasp. Left-right hook slip. He was fighting for his life, for my freedom, and for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. With 30 seconds left in the round, Jax landed a monstrous uppercut that sent Kovacs into the ropes. The referee stepped in to start the count. The stadium was deafening. I looked at the giant jumbotron hanging over the ring. 3, 2, 1. The screen flickered. The bright lights of the stadium seemed to dim for a split second. Then, instead of a flashy sports drink commercial, my father's voice boomed over the entire stadium's PA system, crystal clear and chillingly cold. He'll be a champion and he'll be my slave. I own the judges, I own the debt, and by midnight I'll own the girl too. The Sterlings don't lose, Silas. We just buy the winners. The silence that followed was more violent than any punch. 30,000 people froze. My father's glass of scotch shattered on the floor. He turned to me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. You, he hissed, standing up. You destroyed everything. He reached out to grab my arm, but a shadow fell over us. Jax had vaulted over the ropes, still in his gloves, blood dripping from his brow, standing between me and the most powerful man in the city. The fight's over, Silas, Jax said, his voice echoing through the stunned arena. And you just lost the championship. They say it takes a lifetime to build a reputation and 5 seconds to destroy it. My father's empire didn't collapse overnight, but the foundation was gone. The Sterling tape went viral before the paramedics even got Kovacs out of the ring. By morning, the SEC was at my father's door, and the Athletic Commission had launched a full-scale investigation into every deal he'd ever touched. I didn't stay for the fallout. I walked out of that stadium with nothing but the clothes on my back. I left the penthouse, the black titanium card, and the midnight blue silk dress. I left the Elena Sterling that everyone wanted me to be. 2 months later, I'm standing in a small, dusty building on the outskirts of the city. It's not a palace. It's a community boxing gym. The sign out front says the gutter gym. It's a joke, a badge of honor. Jax is inside, teaching a group of 12-year-olds how to properly wrap their hands. He's not a world champion. He's not a millionaire. He's just a man who knows how to get back up. He still has a scar over his left eye, a permanent reminder of the night we burned it all down. He sees me in the doorway and stops. The kids keep practicing, their little shadows dancing on the brick walls. He walks over, wiping sweat from his forehead with a gray towel. Hey, he says. Just hey. Like no time has passed. Like we're back in that kitchen, but the air is finally clear. Hey, I reply. I heard you're looking for someone to handle the books. And maybe someone who knows how to make a decent pot of coffee for the morning shift. Jax laughs. It's a real laugh, deep and honest. The pay is terrible, El. You'll be poor again. I look at the kids, the sunlight streaming through the high windows, and the man Jax, I say, stepping into the gym. I've been rich and I've been poor. Trust me. Having everything means nothing if you have to lose yourself to keep it. I'd rather have nothing and be exactly who I am. Justice isn't always a gavel in a courtroom. Sometimes, justice is just the ability to walk away from a golden cage and realize the door was never locked. It's about realizing that your value isn't a number in a bank account or a name on a building. It's the strength in your bones and the truth in your heart. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, if you've ever had to lose it all to find yourself, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.